June 12th, a day that we waited for months to get here with a summit between our president and the dictator of North Korea. In the history books. Thanks so much for watching us all be witness to it. I'm Harris. Here's Dana.
A whirlwind summit aimed at peace on the Korean Peninsula as the U.S. and North Korea open the door to a brand new future. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the day in Pearl Harbor after a historic meeting with Kim Jong-un, and he's carrying on.
I'm not sure how awake, but we're still up. There's no question about that. Dana, good morning to you from Singapore, where it's just now touching 2 o'clock in the morning. And White House officials told Fox News going into this whole thing that the tale would really be told about how this would all come out in that one-on-one meeting where President Trump and Kim Jong-un sat down, just the two leaders and their translators. And certainly it does seem to have borne some fruit, though there is some question as to whether or not this was a glorified photo op or whether this will actually yield real results. The president said that Kim Jong-un came into this meeting really wanting to change the dynamic. And listen to what the president said in a press conference yesterday.
My meeting with Chairman Kim was honest, direct, and productive. We got to know each other well in a very confined period of time, under very strong circumstance. We're prepared to start a new history, and we're ready to write a new chapter between our nations.
And of course, there was not just years of political animosity and rhetorical conflict to get over, but these two leaders had been hurling personal detail on in that press conference late yesterday afternoon. Handling the nuclear program and then how going to verify that. The president, by the way, also threw Kim Jong-un a bone, saying that he was going to suspend, at the very least, maybe not end altogether, the joint U.S.-South Korean military exercises. The president called them very provocative, inappropriate, also very expensive, but the president also with the caveat that if the negotiations with North Korea do not turn out the way the president hopes they will, then he could restart those military exercises. And the one thing that the president is not going to do is back off to any degree on sanctions until the dismantlement of North Korea's nuclear program gets to the point where President Trump says it really is on the path to being irreversible. Dana?
All right, John, have a safe trip home. Thank you. And joining us now for a look at the big picture is Sue Mi Terry. She's senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a former senior analyst on the Korean issues for the CIA. She's here for no politics, just substance. Tell me about the historical significance of this moment.
Well, it is historically significant because this is the first time a sitting U.S. president actually sat down with a North Korean leader face to face. So we never had that. There are other times the previous North Korean leaders always wanted this, but we didn't, other President Bush and Obama didn't want to do that yet. So this is historic, regardless of what occurred. This moment is what we witnessed yesterday is a historic moment.
You also know a little bit about Kim Jong-un and the culture, and you mentioned in a piece today that he showed deference to his elder counterpart. How so?
Well, he was being very cordial. In Korean language, there's formal and informal language. He used formal language when addressing President Trump. And even his body language, I think he was deferential. He didn't have any kind of attitude that I could see. So I think he was trying to give his respect to President Trump.
And what will they see in North Korea? Like, what do you think state TV wants those citizens to see?
Well, they're going to see all the things Kim Jong-un was doing, running around Singapore, even taking a selfie. That all the North Korean media was with him. The way they are going to spin it is that North Korea pursued nuclear weapons program and they have completed it. Now they're a powerful country and the whole international community is accepting him. And now you get to sit down with President Trump, the most powerful person in the world. Because of the nuclear
Will they know
program.
that it's because Kim Jong-un has said in theory that he would denuclearize?
I don't know if they're going to know that. I think what they're going to know is that we, the United States and North Korea, are trying to improve our relationship and try to get to another level. But what they're going to think is that now, because North Korea completed the nuclear program, they are able to sit down with the U.S. president and negotiate from a position of strength.
That they're equals.
At least that's their narrative.
And then tell me a little bit about going forward. So we know that Secretary Pompeo and
prestige, look like an equal to the United States. I mean, look at even the little things like North Korean flag, side by side with the American flag. Yeah. They really went out of their way to make North Korea look equal to the United States. And all this symmetry and diplomacy leading up to this summit has made North Korean leader look like a normal leader of a normal country. We all forgot that this is a guy who, killed his half-brother in a Malaysian airport using banned WMD, right? We forgot that he killed his uncle, that we forgot all his ruthlessness.
Or the gulags that are there in North Korea.
Take 200,000 people.
Take a listen to President Trump talking about human rights and what happened yesterday at the summit.
I believe it's a rough situation over there. There's no question about it. And we did discuss it today pretty strongly. I mean, knowing what the main purpose of what we were doing is, denuking, but discussed it at pretty good length. We'll be doing something on it.
Sue, this won't be a surprise to you. The hunger crisis in North Korea estimated that 18 million people are dependent on government food rations. 10.5 million people are believed to be undernourished and 5.6 million affected by natural disasters between 2004 and 2005. I mean, in any way, do you think that Kim Jong-un getting a taste of what it might be like to be a normalized leader in the world, that he might treat his people better? I'm skeptical on that.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful, but I feel like that is something that is going to have to be addressed in the future.
Yeah, I mean, he would want to improve economy for North Korea, just also because he doesn't want to be a ruler of a poor pariah, backward state, right? Just for himself, just self-interest wise. But I'm very skeptical that he's going to open up the prison camps that has 200,000 people in it, and all of a sudden just really, just take care of the human rights issues. I'm very skeptical of that. North Korea spent billions of dollars pursuing nuclear weapons program while watching their people starve. In the mid-1990s, when they were going through massive famine, they spent like $800 million building a mausoleum for Kim Il-sung, while people were literally dying and starving. So maybe, Kim Jong-un does want to, I think, improve his economy, but to say that he's going to completely change the human rights situation around, I think that's...
Can I ask her just one last question? It can be a quick one, though. Yeah. Do you think at the end of the summit that the United States, the world, is safer than it was before?
I do think so. All in all, just because it's better than talking about preventive strike. It's better than the time we're talking about bloody nose. So while this is not ideal at all, I think it's a kind of flawed statement because it was just very aspirational, and I think North Koreans could have given us more. But I do think that this is still better today than where we were just a few months ago.
A net plus.
Yes.
All right. Sue Mi Terry, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
It's difficult to determine, what of concrete nature has occurred, and so I think getting Pompeo in to talk with us more fully about what has happened will be very helpful.
That's Senator Bob Corker on the big meeting. And what comes next for Kim Jong-un and his missiles? A former ambassador to South Korea weighs in. And we just got a statement from Otto Warmbier's parents. We'll tell you what they're saying right after the break.
Chairman Kim at the appropriate time to the White House. I think it's really going to be something that will be very important. And he has accepted, I said, at the appropriate time. We want to go a little bit further down the road.
President Trump on the next steps after his meeting with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. And we just got a statement from the parents of Otto Warmbier. The president talked about him in his press conference this morning. The family saying, quote, "We appreciate President Trump's recent comments about our family. We are proud of Otto and miss him. Hopefully something positive can come from this." Indeed. Alexander Vershbow is a former ambassador to the Republic of Korea and NATO, and we have him here with us today to give us your thoughts, Ambassador, about how you just think the big picture has gone. I know that the president has had to use a little bit of flattery. Was that necessary in order to get the diplomacy going?
Well, perhaps a little bit of flattery can go a long way, and I think the overall atmosphere of this meeting was positive, and that can at least help create a favorable framework for talks. But I'm very disappointed about the substance of the meeting, to be honest. The statement's really thin gruel. It didn't advance the ball at all down the field on denuclearization. In fact, the language is weaker than the agreement that the Bush administration had reached back in 2005. So we don't know about the scope, we don't know about the timing, we don't know about whether there's going to be any verification. So we could have gotten more.
Do you think, Ambassador, that maybe was just because this is just the first meeting and it was a chance to establish a relationship? And I know that Secretary Pompeo and John Bolton, certainly not known to be doves, will be going over to North Korea. And do you think that this provides them basically now a chance to say, all right, we're going to put you to the test now with some more specifics?
Well, that's certainly where we are, and I think it's good that Pompeo is going to be leading the talks. He's already immersed in the subject. He knows what's at stake. But it's a very steep hill to climb, particularly when the North Koreans, I think, despite all the political gains that they got from this meeting, just meeting with the president itself was a big gain, boost their status in the world. Looks like we're almost recognizing them as a nuclear power. They could have given us a bit more. But now we have to get on with putting them to the test, and I think early. We have to think of some early tests that would involve dismantling missiles, warheads, or taking things out of the country that actually cut into their capability to threaten us.
Ambassador, take
beyond
a
the
listen.
symbolic.
Can I have you listen to Senator Lindsey Graham on the goal going forward? Listen.
Okay.
I know who we're talking. We're talking about a guy who's just a complete thug and a killer in North Korea. I have no illusions about who we're talking to. He is not a nice man, but he will do what's best for him and his inner circle. Trump's got to convince him that you'll be safer and more prosperous by giving up your nukes than if you keep them. It's all about Kim. It's all about his regime. It's not about the North Korean people.
Ambassador, based on your expertise, especially with South Korea, wondered what you thought about the idea that President Moon had been quite instrumental in mentoring and advising Kim Jong-un before he went into this meeting, and did the South Koreans end up with more or less than they thought they would?
Well, I haven't heard what President Moon has said to characterize it. I think they were disappointed that there was not at least a small step forward on denuclearization. But the thing that's most worrisome with regard to the South is the president's announcement, apparently without coordinating with the South Koreans or with the Pentagon, that he's going to suspend these large-scale military exercises, which are really critical for keeping forces at a high level of readiness, interoperability, so that we can go into action if there's a North Korean aggression. So that, I think, squandered a little bit of our leverage going into these talks that Pompeo will head. And I hope that it doesn't undermine the chances of getting real denuclearization.
My last question for you is Secretary Pompeo, in the briefing right before the summit, said that he believes that we are on the same page and understand and have the same definition of denuclearization as the North Koreans. Do you think that's true?
I'm not yet convinced of that. I mean, he may have heard things in private that go well beyond this joint statement. But at the moment, we have to assume some of their previous positions still hold, and that they're not ready for the kind of very intrusive verification that's needed to both inventory what they have and then witness the systematic dismantling of the missiles, the weapons, the nuclear reactors that make the material, etc. So, I hope I'm wrong. I hope he's gotten the message, at least what he has to agree to, but I don't think he's agreed to it yet.
Interesting. Well, we'll keep checking in with you. We appreciate your expertise. Ambassador Alexander Vershbow, thank you.
Yeah.
So it's primary day in Nevada. Why one Republican candidate is promising a red wave in November. Plus, 2 races in South Carolina putting the president's clout to the test. We'll explain next. Across America, with voters in 5 states heading to the polls, including Nevada, where they're narrowing down their choices for governor. Chief correspondent Jonathan Hunt, he's live in Las Vegas. Jonathan, it's good to see you. What do you have out there?
Dana, good to see you. We've had a solid, if unspectacular, flow of voters at this particular polling place. The toughest fight on this primary day, as you mentioned, on the Democrat side, where 63-year-old former teacher Chris Giuncilioni, or Chris G as she's known, paints herself as the more progressive of the leading candidates. She has the endorsement of Hillary Clinton, and she says she's the candidate who can best understand the average voter.
If you want to govern people, you have to know how they live, where they live, what their sidewalks, what's their churches or their temples or their mosques, what makes their community, and I'm the only one out there doing it.
Her primary opponent is Steve Sisolak. He's chair of the powerful Clark County Commission. He touts himself as the one with the experience to get things done. And like every candidate across America this election cycle, he too is trying to work out how to deal with the specter of President Trump.
We disagree on some issues, but I'm stating my case. I'm not arguing against somebody else or against my opponents. I want people to understand what I stand for and where I want to go.
On the Republican side, the primary doesn't appear to be close at all. The leading candidate is Adam Laxalt. He's currently Attorney General. He's already looking ahead to November, saying he can beat whichever Democrat wins that party's primary, and he's also dismissing talk of a so-called blue wave.
There is no blue wave here. It doesn't exist. In fact, we're looking forward to a red wave.
Confident you'll be the next governor of Nevada?
We feel very good about this race.
Polls close at 7 p.m. local time, Dana. That's 10 p.m. Eastern. We expect to be able to call the Republican primary race almost immediately. Likely to be a good bit longer before we can call the very tight Democrat race for governor. Dana?
All right, well, we'll be paying attention, Jonathan. Thank you. And for more on today's primaries, I'm joined by Chris Stirewalt, Fox News politics editor and editor of Halftime Report. Chris, while Jonathan was talking, Senator Chuck Schumer came to the podium. They've been having their policy lunch there on the Senate, both the Republicans and Democrats separately. When Chuck Schumer came out, he spent about 15 seconds talking about North Korea, and then he immediately pivoted to health care. What does that tell you about how the Democrats are approaching these midterms?
So there's been disagreement between the two houses, between branches of the Democratic Party about what the appropriate and most useful focus for Democrats is in 2018. Chuck Schumer is not ambiguous on the question. He believes, and is, by the way, supported with a lot of polling data, that healthcare works for Democrats, and what had been a negative for them under Obamacare, now in the regime of hobbled Obamacare, with the Trump administration having gutted much of Obamacare, but still left the construct there, that Democrats have a real opportunity to push Republicans on health insurance, on health care, and Schumer wants to discipline his party to stay focused on that because it's an issue that works.
It might be one of their only issues that works this year as the other numbers change. But I want to ask you also about what Jonathan Hunt was talking about. You've got this race in Nevada, but also up in North Dakota, you'll have a race pretty much settled, and that's going to be a big one as well.
Well, North Dakota, we're waiting for the main event, right? We have two, because it is a sparsely populated state. North Dakota's congressman, Kevin Cramer, is elected at large. So this is one of those rare circumstances where you're going to have somebody running for Senate who has already been elected by the voters statewide, going against Heidi Heitkamp, a freshman who, by the way, has won the favor of President Trump. She is a Democrat, but he obviously likes her, gives her a shout out, shaking the hand, tells her that she's doing a good job, and she has been sympathetic to him. And this, of course, is frustrating for Cramer, who wants a more clear red versus blue line here, but Trump has muddied it for him a few times.
And then tell me a little bit about Virginia. You know, this is the first time, well, really, they voted in 2017 in that gubernatorial election. The Democrats had tremendous turnout. Can they pull that off again in 2018 in the primary tonight? Will you have any indication of that?
Yeah, we'll see some signs. We'll figure out in Virginia. You have 2 or 3 House races where it's competitive in Virginia. The Senate race is not competitive. They obviously don't have a gubernatorial contest this year. So we're really going to be looking at these House districts, especially one represented by Barbara Comstock in Northern Virginia. How do the Democrats sort themselves out? And remember, part of the secret for Democrats in Virginia, their great performance in Virginia in 2017, was the fact that liberal voters lined up behind moderates like Governor Ralph Northam, that they swung in behind him and gave him their full support. Will we see division? Will we see agreement? It's not just how robust they are, it is how much in agreement they are.
And finally, take me down to South Carolina. We're watching a couple of races there. Representative Mark Sanford, the incumbent, trying to beat back a primary challenge on the Republican side, and Governor Henry McMaster as well, hoping to get Trump support. Your thoughts?
I think McMaster, if McMaster is not fine, that would be a real shocker, because he is sort of the soul of the state's political establishment that predates Nikki Haley, the revolution that Nikki Haley brought to the state. So he is of the old guard, but he also has the support of the president. So he ought to be fine. Sanford's in a difficult spot. He has carved out a good second career for himself as a congressman, sort of a roll up your sleeves, do a good job kind of congressman, low profile after the scandal and the governorship and all of that stuff. Now he's facing an opponent who is totally willing to go there. She is willing to go after him on his scandal. She's willing to call him out for the times that he has been critical of President Trump. And she's hoping that in that district, Trump affinity will sort of go beyond the attachment that these voters have for a congressman who served him well.
All right. Well, are you going to stay up late for these results out of Nevada?
Heck yeah. Shannon Bream and I will be right here, here in the Washington
at 11
studio.
p.m. You call it with Chris and Shannon. A little segment you guys could have. All right, Chris Stirewalt, thank you.
You bet.
President Trump saying the U.S. will suspend military drills with South Korea, what that means for our allies like South Korea, and could it give China an upper hand? Kim Jong-un promising to work towards denuclearizing the Korean peninsula, and after the summit, the president said he would halt joint military exercises with South Korea.
I'm doing something that I've wanted to do from the beginning. We stopped playing those war games that cost us a fortune. You know, we're spending a fortune every number of months. We're doing war games with South Korea. I wanted to stop the war games. I thought they were very provocative, but I also think they're very expensive.
Lucas Tomlinson is at the Pentagon. Lucas, was the Pentagon actually caught by surprise by the president's announcement?
Dana, many officials here were surprised. It's notable the suspension was not part of the agreement signed by President Trump and Kim Jong-un. The Pentagon calls joint exercises with South Korea defensive in nature. The term provocative has never been used. President Trump says for now, all 28,500 U.S. troops in South Korea will remain there despite his call to suspend the drills.
I want to get our soldiers out. I want to bring our soldiers back home. We have right now 32,000 soldiers in South Korea, and I'd like to be able to bring them back home, but that's not part of the equation right now.
The next joint exercise is planned for August. Officials say it's more computer-based training. It's the annual spring drills that upset North Korea. They were canceled in the mid-90s when similar agreements were made with North Korea. Now, officials say U.S. military training will continue over in Japan, where there's actually twice as many U.S. troops. And every year, Thailand hosts the largest annual U.S. military training in the region. U.S. and South Korea are part of that exercise.
And Lucas, what does the Pentagon actually know about North Korea's missile stockpile? Like, it's such a mystery. I'm curious if they have a pretty good handle on it.
Well, they do, Dana. Over the past 2 decades, North Korea has amassed a stockpile of missiles, short-range missiles that can hit South Korea, intermediate-range missiles that can hit Japan, and U.S. forces in Guam. In November, its last missile launch, North Korea fired off its third intercontinental ballistic missile into space, which flew higher and farther than any before, capable of reaching the United States, if it can mount a nuclear warhead capable of withstanding the intense heat and pressures of re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. So far, North Korea has not proven it can. The latest intelligence estimates say North Korea has up to 60 nuclear warheads. And last fall, North Korea detonated its largest thermonuclear device to date, a blast 8 times larger than the U.S. bomb dropped on Japan to end World War II. Dana?
All right, Lucas, thank you. And I'm joined now by retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. He's Senior Fellow for Defense Priorities and a former U.S. advisor to the South Korean Army. So setting aside sort of the diplomacy that the president was working on, what about this hard power issue? How do you see it?
Well, I think that in terms of this suspension of the military drills, I don't view that at all as a concession, as some are calling it. I think it's actually a calculated risk by the president, because it actually costs us nothing to do, because it doesn't diminish our military capability or readiness in the least in the short term, because there's nothing that's going to stop our forces from training, as your correspondent there just mentioned, or the South Korean forces. So it could, however, play the path for lowering the tensions continually and moving towards denuclearization. So this could be a very good play by the president.
I know that if there's a saying in America, if you want peace, prepare for war. So just to put a finer point on this, apparently the BBC had a report that, this is the tweet, let me just read it to you. Chinese Foreign Ministry announced that Trump would suspend U.S. war games with South Korea before Trump announced it himself at the press briefing. That suggests Kim's people were on the phone to Beijing straight after the meeting because they recognized how big a concession it was. But that's interesting for me. I think you're the first person I've heard explain that it actually is not as big a concession as some people might worry.
Well, it's not. And the reason I say that is because our strategic capabilities and our tactical capabilities are unchanged. And I think President Trump is very well aware of that. And anything that's suspended can be unsuspended in a day. And, you know, our military is still on the ground. Our Air Force is still powerful. Our Pacific Fleet is still very much capable of doing things everywhere. So we have given up nothing. But if it gives us the opportunity to move towards denuclearization, that's a really good play.
What also, tell me a little bit about cyber warfare, because I know that the North Koreans in particular have been very adept at causing lots of problems all around the world, but the cyber warfare issue and our preparedness in that area.
Yeah, and that is a very critical issue for us to take care of, and one that I've been advocating for quite a long time, because you can have a great military, but if you're not protected from cyber intrusion, it can limit your ability to operate in any realm. And we do know that North Korea has been engaging quite a lot of that, and we should expect that. But our countermeasures, I think, are starting to improve. And it's constantly evolving. So it's something we need to put a lot of emphasis on, but I feel pretty confident in our abilities right now.
What do you think that the North Korean military, to the extent that they saw any coverage of the summit, that they're thinking now as they are obviously working for somebody who is a dictator and who has treated the citizens of that country terribly, but they're extremely loyal to him? Are there any cracks in the armor with his military?
I don't think we see any cracks in the armor, at least not on any large scale up to this point. Although, you know, this sacking of these 3 senior generals could be an indication of that, depending on what the inside reason for all of it was. But we do have quite a bit of reporting that that the military, which has been prioritized in the resources that they've gotten for decades now, has not been fed as well as we had hoped, as well as they had wanted, rather. And you got to think that when they're hearing about the possibility of lowered tensions, that's probably going to make them happy.
Indeed. Let me just, well, and I have about a minute left with you. Just since 1955, after the Korean War, you know, it started then. Currently, we have 23,000 U.S. forces in South Korea. That's ground, air, naval, special ops. And I just wonder if you have a word or some thoughts about all of the people, all the Americans who have served in that area since 1955.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we were placed there at a time when South Korea could not defend itself, and they utterly relied on us. I was one of those. I served there in the 90s, and everybody who's been there is part of you know, defending our treasured ally in South Korea, and I think they can be proud of what's coming in now. And if we can ever get to the point to where peace can actually be achieved, it would be a great accomplishment, and everybody would feel you know, like they had a real part in making that happen.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
North Koreans learning about the summit in a slightly different way than the rest of the world. Are they getting the whole picture? Doubt it. Plus, a national forest now off limits as a raging wildfire burns out of control. We'll tell you more.
Shepard Smith on the Fox News deck. The meeting is over. The leaders headed home. Lots of questions remain, including what is the United States giving up? What is the United States getting? And is North Korea at all serious about denuclearizing? We'll hear from a man who's dealt directly with the North Korean leader, the former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Bill Richardson. Top of the hour on Shepard Smith reporting. We'll see you then.
Wildfire fear sparking the closure of Colorado's national forest, the first time this has happened in nearly 2 decades. The move means hundreds of miles of trails and thousands of miles of back roads are off limits to hikers, bikers, and campers. 2,000 homes have also been evacuated because of a forest fire that has burned more than 30 square miles so far. So a handshake seen around the world as President Trump and Kim Jong-un meet for the first time. And surprisingly, even the people of North Korea knew Kim was in Singapore for the summit, with the country's main newspaper offering front page, of course, state-directed coverage. Joining me now is Lanhee Chen. He's a former policy director for the Romney campaign and at the Hoover Institute now. Brian McKeon is a former deputy assistant to President Obama. Glad to have you both here. Brian, let me start with you. I understand that there's a general feeling that the summit declaration is less than expected, but is it a step in the right direction?
Well, certainly the meeting is an important step in the right direction, and now we'll begin a process of negotiation. And so I don't want to diminish that, but I do think the statement was a little light on substance. It reminds me of the Peggy Lee song, Is That All There Is? There's a lot less detail than have been in prior statements of this kind.
But Lanhee, is that possibly because the president envisions, and he had set expectations to say, you know, this is probably the first of what will be many meetings to come?
Yeah, I think a lot of the hard work remains, Dana. And look, we have to bear in mind this important fact. This is the first time in the 65 some odd years since the end of the cessation of conflict on the Korean Peninsula that we've seen the leader of North Korea meeting with a sitting American president. So there is some important imagery, there's some important sort of pomp and circumstance that goes beyond just this meeting, and in fact goes to the fact that we do have a lengthy process ahead, and I think it's important for us to bear that in mind.
I do think about the North Korean people a lot, and Anna Fifield of the Washington Post tweeted this, that North Korea's main newspaper today features color photos of Kim Jong-un walking around Singapore, a breathtaking modern city with an electricity supply that North Koreans can only dream about. Quite apart from the photos themselves, I can't believe North Korea reported this so quickly. Usually the regime takes days to report news. Here, they took only hours. Brian, based on your expertise at the National Security Council, what do you think this might indicate?
Well, I think it indicates that Kim Jong-un is feeling confident in his position in stepping forward and having these initial negotiations with President Trump. And he's certainly going to take a victory lap at home to show his people that he's advancing their security interests, and he's on the world stage at a level with the president of the leading country in the world.
Meanwhile, Lanhee, there's other news, of course, with the trade summit that the president just came out of, the G7, before he went to Singapore. He talked about that a little bit in his press conference this morning. Take a listen.
The picture with Angela Merkel, who I get along with very well, where I'm sitting there like this, that picture was, we're waiting for the document because I wanted to see the final document as changed by the changes that I requested. That was a very friendly, I know it didn't look friendly, and I know it was reported like sort of nasty both ways. I was angry at her. Actually, we were just talking, the whole group, about something unrelated to everything, very friendly, waiting for the document to come back so I could read it before I leave.
Lanhee, I had some sympathy for the president there, having been someone who looked at a photograph and said, well, that's actually not descriptive of what actually happened there. And do you think that maybe tensions amongst the G7 are not as difficult as the media has been reporting?
Yeah, look, I think it's very easy for folks on the outside to try to craft a narrative around this. Obviously, there were some hurt feelings, some back and forth maybe before and during the summit, but the reality is only the folks in that room really understand what was going on. And the dynamic is very complicated right now. Look, the United States is in uncharted territory here when we think about our trading relationships with some of these countries, as well as the fact that you have the president reaching out to Kim Jong-un in kind of a historic moment. So, you know, the status quo has been turned upside down a little bit, but I think it's premature for us to draw conclusions about fraying alliances with Europe when really all we have is a picture and a little bit of dialogue to go on.
Yeah, Brian, one of the issues has been NATO and the contributions of the countries to NATO. The president wanting to deal with that even when he was on the campaign trail, and there started to be a little bit of movement in Europe. Do you think that you might see even more after this G7 summit to try to come to the table with something that everybody can say they gave and they won a little bit?
Well, quite apart from whatever happened in this room, there's a lot of tension in the alliance and within our close partners. because of the president's move on the Iran deal and the Paris climate agreement and what he's done on trade. So you can't really, sure, we don't know what happened in that room and what that picture was about, but we do know there are real tensions between the United States and its allies. Countries in Europe are stepping up with increased defense spending. They started doing it after the Russians went into Crimea and eastern Ukraine and the NATO summit that was held in 2014, and that's continued, and that's a good thing.
Lanhee, last word to you on this trade issue, especially when the NAFTA deal still is not settled either.
Right, and I think that is a big concern. I mean, the fact that we have not been able to reach an agreement. And look, the president wants to do bilateral agreements with Canada and Mexico. I get that, but that's extraordinarily difficult, particularly when we've been operating under the NAFTA regime now for two decades. So hopefully they can reach an agreement. Hopefully they can move the ball forward. But right now it does not look like it's in a very good place.
All right, Lanhee Chen and Brian McKeon, I thank you for being with me today.
Thank you.
So a major Supreme Court decision on voting. In a 5-4 ruling, the High Court upheld an Ohio law that allows the state to purge voter rolls if residents skip elections. Under the law, registered voters who have been inactive in 2 or more federal elections and failed to return a residency confirmation form will have their names dropped from the polls. Opponents argue the policy is intended to shut out minorities and the poor who tend to vote Democratic. Others thought it was a good decision. Seattle could repeal a controversial tax the city used to fund programs to help the homeless. So, what comes next? Plus, 2 entire cities are calling out sick from work today and partying in the streets. We'll tell you about the happy hockey and basketball fans everywhere. Scientists say an asthma drug shows potential for treating dementia. Researchers gave the drug Zyflo to mice and engineered to have brains resembling 60-year-old dementia patients. For the first time, scientists were able to reverse some of the damage caused by the buildup of proteins in the brain. After 16 weeks, the study found they had been cut in half. Researchers caution it is only a first step, but they hope to set up human trials soon. Seattle City Council about to vote on repealing a controversial tax on big companies to help the city's homeless. The head tax, which passed unanimously last month, was behind Amazon's decision to put expansion plans on hold. Dan Springer is live in Seattle. Dan, that was a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah, it's a stunning reversal, Dana. As you mentioned, just a few weeks ago, there was a 9-0 vote by this same city council to enact this head tax. And in about an hour, we're expecting a 7-2 vote to repeal it. Now, one of the 2 members who is not on board with repealing this tax put out a call to action today to members of her socialist movement to show up and protest this about-face. And dozens did, in fact, show up today. 400 big businesses would have paid $275 per employee. Amazon, with its 45,000 Seattle workers, was the big target all along and would have paid more than $12 million a year. But the company fired back, saying it might cancel plans to add 7,000 high-paying jobs in the city. And that sparked a backlash. Tax opponents collected 20,000 signatures in just a couple of weeks, more than enough to get a referendum on the November ballot.
I think the majority of people out there realize that this was an attack on the businesses that employ the people who live here, right? And at some point, you're going after the people if you're going after our jobs.
Now, all 7 of those who were expected to vote to repeal the tax are up for re-election in November. So politics certainly played a big part in this. Dana?
But Dan, we had you on yesterday because I thought that story was pretty fascinating. The homeless problem in Seattle and how they're trying to deal with it. If this tax is repealed, what's the plan for addressing homelessness in the future?
Well, as you know, it is a big problem here, but a lot of people feel that it's not really about how much money they have, but how they are spending it. And I think the mayor and the city council will have to show some results before they get more money from taxpayers. And if they can do that, expect them to try a more regional approach. In other words, raise taxes countywide and even statewide. Seattle trails only Los Angeles and New York City in the number of people who are homeless. A socialist on the city council just held a quick news conference, and she was really trying to nationalize this by saying that the whole country is watching Seattle as to whether they can get this head tax passed. And obviously they did get it passed, but there was a backlash, and now they're about to repeal it.
Dana?
Yeah, it's almost worse to pass it and then have to repeal it a month later. They should find a better way. All right, Dan Springer. Enough of my commentary. Thank you. So a big day for sports fans as two teams holding their championship parades today. Fans are lined up in Oakland to celebrate the Warriors' sweep of the Cleveland Cavaliers to win their second straight NBA title. Meanwhile, fans flooded the nation's capital today to mark the Stanley Cup victory by the Washington Capitals. The Capitals beat the Las Vegas Golden Knights last week to claim the first cup in franchise history. And we'll be right back.